The prairie was quiet, that kind of silence that follows after a storm has spent itself. Then came a voice, faint, trembling, almost swallowed by the wind. "Please, don't leave me here." Eliza Monroe's face was pressed into the cold earth, rain mixing with blood along her cheek. Her dress was torn, one boot missing, and the rope that had dragged her across the field still knotted around her ankle. Every breath burned. She tried to crawl, pulling herself toward the shadow of a cottonwood tree. But her leg, it screamed with pain every time she moved. Behind her, thunder rolled again, or maybe it wasn't thunder. Maybe it was hooves. A flicker of light danced across the horizon. Torches, men shouting, laughing, searching. She bit her lip to keep from crying out. The taste of iron filled her mouth. Her fingers sank into the mud, clinging to the only thing that felt real. "God," she whispered, her voice breaking like a child's, "if you still see me, please, let someone hear me." The wind shifted, the world went still. Then, hooves again, closer this time, but not the one she feared. A single horse stopped beside her. The rider dismounted. Boots sank into the wet ground, slow and heavy. Eliza forced her eyes open through the rain. A silhouette stood before her, broad-shouldered, coat dripping, hat shadowing his face. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw mercy itself standing in the storm. And someone did hear her, someone who wasn't supposed to come back. Before we find out what happens next, tell me, what time is it where you're listening from? And if you want to ride along for more tales of courage, subscribe now. Now, let's see what waited for them in the dark. Samuel Briggs had spent the morning alone, walking the broken fence line with his hat pulled low against the drizzle. The rain had washed away the dust, but not the ghosts. It never did. When the cry reached him, it wasn't loud, just enough to stir something buried deep. He froze. The wind carried that voice again, faint, desperate. For a long moment, he stood still, jaw tight, rain dripping from his hat brim. He'd sworn he wouldn't do this again, not after last year, not after the storm that took his wife and left him hollow. But then he saw her. A woman half buried in the mud beneath the cottonwood, one hand clutching the earth like it might keep her alive. Her hair tangled, her dress soaked through, her skin pale as the clouds above. Samuel dismounted, his boots sinking into the soft ground. "Easy now," he murmured, kneeling beside her. "You're all right. I've got you." Her eyes fluttered open, green, wild, filled with a kind of fear that made his chest ache. "Please," she whispered, "don't leave me." He didn't. He wrapped his coat around her and lifted her into his arms. She was light, too light, like the storm had already taken most of her. The ride back was slow. Every jolt drew a soft gasp from her lips. He kept his eyes on the horizon, guiding the horse through sheets of rain until the old ranch house came into view. Inside, the fire crackled weakly. He laid her on the worn sofa, fetched a basin of warm water, and began washing the mud from her wounds. That's when he noticed the mark along her leg, deep, raw, the kind made not by a fall, but by rope, by force. Samuel's hands stopped. His breath hitched. The look in her eyes told him she knew what he'd just realized. He turned toward the window, the storm outside mirroring the one inside his chest. The past he'd buried began to stir. He had no idea that saving her would open an old wound he thought had healed. The storm had calmed, but the wind still moved through the house like a warning. Samuel sat by the fire, pressing a clean cloth against Eliza's wound. Her breathing came shallow, uneven. Every touch made her flinch. "You'll be all right," he said softly. "Just rest. You're safe here." But she wasn't. The moment the words left his mouth, her body tensed. Her eyes darted toward the window, wide and terrified. "They're coming," she whispered. Samuel froze. "Who?" Her voice was a broken thread. "The men who took me. They'll kill anyone who saw me." Before he could answer, a faint rhythm reached his ears. Hooves, 3 of them, moving fast.
He set the basin down, grabbed the rifle from above the mantel, and blew out the lamp. The room sank into darkness, lit only by the dull red glow of the fire. Outside, the sound grew louder. A man's voice called out, "Briggs, we know she's in there. Hand her over, and we'll leave you in one piece." Samuel's jaw clenched.
He pulled back the hammer on the rifle. "I buried my wife last year," he muttered. "If you think I'm afraid of dying, you came to the wrong ranch." The first shot shattered the silence. Glass exploded. Eliza screamed. Samuel fired back. Once, twice, a third time. A shadow fell across the porch. Another ran behind the barn. He moved with the calm of a man who'd already lost everything once before. When the door burst open, Samuel met the intruder with the barrel of his rifle. One pull of the trigger, and the man fell, heavy, lifeless, against the floorboards. The other two fled into the night, horses thrashing mud and water as they vanished into the dark hills. Samuel stood over the body, chest rising, smoke still curling from the gun barrel. Eliza sat trembling by the hearth, hands clutching the blanket to her chest. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "The mark on his arm." He turned the dead man's wrist toward the firelight. The skin was inked with a coiled serpent biting its own tail. Eliza's face drained of color. "I've seen it before," she said. "Where they kept us. It was carved above the barn door." Samuel stared at the symbol, old rage flickering alive inside him.
That mark, the same one he'd seen years ago, burned into the stable wall where his wife had died. He knelt, his fingers tightening around the rifle. "They weren't just hunting you," he said quietly. "They were the same men who took her from me." Outside, thunder rolled again, not from the storm, but from the far hills. The night was far from over, and for the first time in a long time, Samuel Briggs wasn't just fighting to protect a stranger. He was fighting to settle an old debt. Fear turned to resolve, and in that fragile silence after the gunfire, a faint ember of hope began to glow. Night fell heavy and still, the kind that made every creak in the house sound like a whisper from the past. Samuel hadn't slept. He sat near the window, rifle across his knees, eyes fixed on the tree line. Eliza slept fitfully by the fire, murmuring things she didn't remember. Every few hours she'd wake in panic until she saw him there. Then she'd close her eyes again. But the night had plans of its own. A sudden flare lit up the horizon, orange, violent. Samuel's heart dropped. The barn. He was out the door before the echo reached the house. The wind carried the stench of smoke and burning hay.
Horses screamed from inside, thrashing against their stalls. "Eliza, stay inside!" he shouted, sprinting toward the flames. The heat slammed into him as he forced the barn door open. A beam cracked above, falling across his shoulder, a flash of pain, sharp and deep. He pushed through it, cutting the ropes, slapping the horses free. They bolted into the night. And then he saw him, standing at the far end of the firelight, coat half burned, a smile carved cruel across his face. Garrison Cole, the man Samuel had prayed to never see again. The man who'd once called himself a friend until he'd sold Samuel's wife to pay his gambling debts. Samuel raised the rifle. Cole lifted his hands in mock surrender. "You can't save every lost soul, Samuel," he said, his voice hoarse through the smoke. Samuel's reply was quiet, almost drowned by the crackling fire. "Maybe not, but I can save one." Cole's smile faded. "That woman, she's nothing to you." "She's someone God didn't give up on," Samuel said, stepping closer. "That's enough for me." Cole lunged first. The rifle went off, missed. They crashed into the dirt, fists and fury in the red glow of the burning barn. Samuel's shoulder gave out. The pain sent stars across his vision. Cole grabbed the pistol from Samuel's belt, shoving it against his chest. Then a shot tore through the night. Cole stumbled back, eyes wide.
Eliza stood behind him, both hands gripping Samuel's revolver, smoke rising from the barrel. For a long second, no one moved. The fire roared around them, lighting the scene like judgment itself. "Come on," Samuel breathed, pulling her toward the back. "We have to go." They ran, through the fields, through the wind, until the world fell quiet again. At last they reached it, the old chapel, long abandoned, half swallowed by vines and dust. Samuel had come here once, years ago, when grief had nearly broken him. Now, in the flicker of their lantern, the cracked wooden cross still stood above the altar. Eliza sank to her knees, trembling. "Why did God send you to me?" she whispered. Samuel's voice was low, almost reverent. "Maybe to remind me that mercy's still worth fighting for." Outside, the fire consumed what was left of the past. Inside, the light of it glowed softly through the chapel window, like redemption burning its way through the dark. The dawn came slow, pale and quiet after the night of fire. Ash drifted in the wind like the ghosts of what once was. Samuel and Eliza followed the creek downstream, the morning air heavy with smoke and silence. They found him there, Garrison Cole, half buried in the reeds, one arm twisted beneath him, blood seeping through his shirt. Still alive. Barely. Samuel stopped a few paces away. The rifle in his hands felt heavier than it ever had before. This was the moment he'd waited years for. The man who destroyed his family now lay helpless before him. Cole coughed, looking up through the haze. "You should have finished it last night." Samuel's jaw tightened. "I don't take joy in killing," he said. Cole smiled faintly. "Then you haven't lost enough yet." The hammer clicked back. Eliza's voice broke the silence. "Samuel, please." He didn't turn, eyes still fixed on the man in the mud. Her words came trembling but steady. "If you kill him, you'll lose what's left of yourself." For a long time, nothing moved. The creek whispered between them. The wind pressed through the grass. Samuel's finger rested on the trigger, then fell away. He exhaled, a sound caught between anger and release. He lowered the rifle. "Get up," he said quietly. "You'll face what you've done, the right way this time." Cole tried to laugh, but it came out hollow. Samuel tied his wrists with a length of rope, binding the same hands that had caused so much ruin. Then he looked toward the rising sun, its light cutting through the last trail of smoke. Eliza watched him, eyes shining with relief and disbelief. "You spared him," she whispered. Samuel nodded. Sometimes mercy is the hardest bullet to fire. He glanced once more at Cole, not with hatred, but with something heavier, forgiveness that cost more than blood. Then he turned away, leading the horses toward the horizon. The fire behind them was dying, and for the first time in years, Samuel Briggs walked without the weight of vengeance on his back. The fire had died, leaving behind a sky washed clean. Dew clung to the grass, sparkling where the sun touched it, and the world felt lighter somehow. By mid-morning, Samuel and Eliza rode back toward the ranch. The air still smelled faintly of smoke and wet earth. Fences were scorched, the barn half gone, but the house still stood, blackened in places, yet standing. Eliza swung her legs off the horse, wincing as her injured leg touched the ground. Samuel moved to steady her, but she shook her head gently. "I can manage." Inside, the silence felt different now, no longer haunted, just quiet. She moved about the kitchen slowly, filling a pot, lighting the stove. The simple sounds, water pouring, the click of the kettle, felt almost holy. When the tea began to steam, Samuel stepped onto the porch and hammered a board into place. The last one bore the faded letters Briggs Ranch. He straightened it, brushing away the soot. Eliza appeared behind him with 2 cups of tea. "Here," she said softly, "you look like a man who's forgotten what warmth tastes like." He took it, smiling faintly. Maybe I had. They stood side by side, watching the morning stretch across the plains. In the distance, smoke curled from the remains of the barn, a scar against the gold light. Eliza broke the silence first. "I thought the world had forgotten kindness," she whispered. Samuel's gaze stayed on the horizon. "Maybe kindness never left," he said.
"We just stopped looking for it." A long pause followed, the kind that didn't need filling. Somewhere nearby, a lark began to sing. Eliza turned toward him, eyes soft. "What will you do now?" He thought for a moment. "Rebuild. Maybe start again." She smiled, small but real. "Then you won't be doing it alone." For the first time since the storm, Samuel let out a breath that felt like peace. The sun climbed higher, warm and golden, and as he lifted the tea to his lips, the taste wasn't just of leaves or smoke. It was of something long lost, found again at last: hope. The day faded slow, gold bleeding into rose across the prairie sky. Samuel sat on the porch steps, his shoulder wrapped, a cup of tea cooling in his hands. Eliza stood by the fence, watching the light dance over the grass where fire had once burned. Neither spoke. They didn't have to. Sometimes silence is the only prayer that feels true. The wind carried the scent of rain and cedar, the same scent that had once meant grief, but now whispered peace. Samuel looked out over the land and murmured, almost to himself, "Maybe salvation doesn't come from miracles, but from the small mercies we give to one another." Eliza turned toward him, smiling through the quiet. "That sounds like something worth believing in." He nodded. "It is." If you were Samuel Briggs, would you have pulled the trigger or let mercy speak instead? Leave your thoughts on this Western tale in the comments. If this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe for more Wild West stories of courage and second chances. Pour yourself a cup of tea and tell me, what time is it where you're listening from tonight?